Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar, COVID-19 Vaccines and Allergy. Is any approved vaccine the best vaccine? I'm Jennifer Gertz, Executive Director of Food Allergy Canada, and for those of you who are familiar with our organization, you know that we are a registered charity that focuses on providing education and support for those impacted by food allergy and acting as a national voice on key patient issues. In late February, we hosted a webinar on COVID-19 vaccines with tremendous response from our audience. At that time, we had 2 approved vaccines and were in the early stages of the vaccine rollout. As of today, we have 4 approved vaccines, and with 18 million doses having shipped across Canada, the decision on vaccination is in the front of minds of many, and there's a high level of interest in understanding the eligibility and safety of the approved vaccines for those managing food allergy. Complicating this is navigating the mixed messages that we're hearing about that is leading to some questions on not whether to get vaccinated, but on which vaccine might be best for me, particularly if I have allergies and the risk of anaphylaxis. Today, we are going to explore these questions with experts from Health Canada, infectious disease, and allergy. And we have about 45 minutes for this session, but we do have the ability to extend it by 10 to 15 minutes if need be. So a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. The session is for informational purposes only and will not provide specific medical advice. Please talk to your doctor about any concerns that you have or questions that you have regarding your own health or your child's health. I'd like to thank everybody for submitting their questions on registration. We had several hundreds of questions and we've synthesized it, and there are some common themes, so we'll begin to tackle that in today's session. And lastly, this webinar will be recorded and shared on foodallergycanada.ca afterwards. For the structure for this webinar, here's what we're going to cover off. The first thing we're going to cover off is what vaccines are approved in Canada and who they're recommended for. We're then going to get into a portion that focuses on the questions of safety of the vaccine if you're managing an allergy specifically. Then we're going to get into a topic on understanding the adverse reaction pictures, and then we're going to kind of wrap the session up with exploring the question of risk and benefit and the question of, is there a vaccine that's better suited to those with food allergy? I'd like to invite our 3 experts to turn on their webcams, and I'll introduce them. So today we have Dr. Megan Bettle from Health Canada. Dr. Bettle has a background as a researcher in molecular biology and the genetics of rare disease. Her current position is the Director General of the COVID-19 Regulatory Response Team for the Health Products and Food Branch. Welcome, Dr. Bettle. Next, we have Dr. Zain Chagla. He's a specialist in infectious disease and is a consultant physician at St. Joseph Hospital and the Hamilton Health Sciences in Ontario. He's also an associate professor of medicine at McMaster University, and I suspect many of you have heard Dr. Chagla or read about him in the media as he's sought after to provide his expertise on this subject. We are also fortunate to have Dr. Harold Kim join us, and Dr. Kim, if you can turn on your webcam, that would be great. Dr. Kim is an allergist. He's an adjunct professor at the University of Western Ontario and an assistant clinical professor at McMaster University. He's also the past president of the Canadian Society of Allergy and Clinical Immunology, or what we refer to as CSACI, and he's an expert involved in peer-reviewed articles on the topic of COVID-19 and allergy. So let's start. The first question, we want to start off with the primary question of our audience, and this came in through a lot of the questions that were received in advance, and then we'll dig into some of the detail. But it's the question of, if I have a food allergy, am I eligible to receive the vaccine, and is this vaccine safe for me?
Would you like us to respond to that, Jennifer?
I would like you to respond to that, Dr. Kim.
I would be happy to, because that's been a common question that we're getting over the last several months. And there's no increased risk, we believe, with patients with allergies that are not allergic to the vaccine itself or to a component of the vaccine. So we have suggested that all patients with food allergy should receive the vaccines when they're ready to go for them.
So they're safe for people with food allergy.
Yeah, there's no contraindications or felt to be any increased risk. For example, if you have a 25-year-old with peanut allergy, there's no reason for that patient not to receive the vaccine.
Okay, terrific. Okay, so let's, with that kind of in the background, let's move on to the conversation on what's approved in Canada. And I'm going to turn to Dr. Bettel from Health Canada to walk us through what are the approved vaccines and who are they approved for.
So thanks for having me back. And I think we're going to assume that a lot of the people attending may have seen the recording from the first webinar, but I did kind of want to repeat that all of the vaccines which Health Canada has authorized have gone through, they've had animal studies, they've had extensive clinical trials, including phase 3 trials with tens of thousands of people, and they've now been used in millions of people. So, you know, we've gone through a rapid development process, but there's been a lot of science behind these authorizations, and we can have a lot of confidence that when Health Canada approves the vaccine, we've looked at all of the data, we've looked at the safety, we've looked at the efficacy, we've looked at the manufacturing, and we're confident that these can be used in Canada. So as you mentioned, Jennifer, there have been 4 vaccines which have been authorized in Canada now. The first one was Pfizer, which was originally authorized for people 16 years of age and older, but just last week we were able to extend that indication so it can now be used in people 12 years of age and older. And this has been authorized, that the Health Canada authorized indication is 2 doses, which should be given about 21 days apart. We've also authorized the Moderna mRNA vaccine, and all of these other vaccines are authorized just for adults right now. So clinical trials in children are ongoing, but all of them are authorized for people 18 years of age and older. Again, Moderna is 2 doses, 1 month apart. And then the AstraZeneca vaccine was authorized in February, I think after our first webinar. And we actually gave 2 authorizations at the same time. There was the AstraZeneca vaccine, and then there was a version of the AstraZeneca vaccine, which is called Covishield, which is made by a different manufacturer according to the same recipe. So you may have seen people using different names or different brand names, but it's all the same AstraZeneca vaccine, which is also authorized for adults. This was should be given as 2 doses, but the clinical trials for this vaccine used a wider dosing range. So our authorized indication is to have the second dose anywhere from 4 to 12 weeks apart. And finally, we've authorized the Janssen vaccine, which is slightly different because this was tested as a single dose, which means it can have some advantages for maybe use in hard to reach populations. Again, authorized for adults so far. This vaccine hasn't yet been deployed in Canada. It's authorized, but we're waiting for some quality issues to be further examined before we say it's okay, that the quality is good enough for this particular batch to be deployed in Canada. As was already mentioned, so there aren't a lot of people who should not receive the vaccine. The clinical trials were done, as I said, in tens of thousands of people, and those included people with medical conditions who were taking other medication. And the only people that we would say should not receive the vaccines are the people who have a known allergy to the ingredients or who have had an anaphylactic reaction after they've had the first dose of the vaccine. We'll talk later about other safety issues. The other group of people who should not receive a second dose of the vaccine are those who have had a blood clot issue following the first dose.
Okay.
So if we go on to the next slide, what I think we wanted to talk about is kind of roles and responsibilities. So there are a lot of people involved in bringing vaccines to Canadians, and it's important to kind of clarify some of the roles and responsibilities. So I'm here to speak for Health Canada. We're the regulator. So it's our job basically under our Canada's legal framework to make a decision as to whether a drug, including a vaccine, can be sold in Canada. So the process is a manufacturer will make a submission to Health Canada. They'll provide us with all of their data. We'll assess it. And as I said, we're looking at the safety, we're looking at the efficacy, does it work? And we're looking at the quality. Is it made really well? Is it made consistently? And then we can say yes or no, this is a product that can be made available in Canada. The Public Health Agency also reports to the Minister of Health, but is a separate organization, and they're involved in the coordination of public health across Canada. And in the current context, they're responsible for obtaining the vaccines and distributing the vaccines to the different provinces. We've heard a lot about NACI. NACI is the National Advisory Committee on Immunization. They are not part of the government. They are a group of independent experts, and every country, or almost every country, will have a similar group. And their job is to provide advice on how different vaccines can be used in immunization programs. So they look at the vaccines that Health Canada has approved, they look at the science, and then they make recommendations. So they're not a decision-making body, they're making recommendations based on the science, and then the provinces and territories are responsible for taking those recommendations, taking other expert advice, looking at what's happening in their province, and the provinces and territories will make the decision as to what a vaccination program should look like. So that's why you can see different eligibility in different provinces, different recommendations for use, because it ultimately comes down to what's most important for that jurisdiction at that time. But I think what people can really be reassured is that by the time a vaccine is being made available through your local public health unit, there have been a lot of people involved in thinking about whether it's the right vaccine to be offered to that population. So at that point, we can be pretty confident that all of the vaccines can and should be used. So
Great.
maybe I'll stop there and we'll go on to the next bit.
Okay, that's great. So if we can turn off the slides and get all the webcams back up, I would like to just because we had some questions coming in on the chat as soon as the information went up on dose interval. Okay, and so maybe Dr. Chagla, if you could kind of, we were going to explore this a little bit later, but I think now is the right time to talk about that question. And also if you can give your comments on how individuals should navigate the different messages. I think Dr. Bettel did a great job of explaining who does what, but you know, when you're sitting there and you're reading the paper or you're listening to the news, like how do you actually think through navigating, okay, where do I go and what message should I be taking?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, people have to recognize that this is an evolving field, right? We are learning more about these vaccines a day. You know, the AstraZeneca, particular, the clotting issue associated with AstraZeneca really was first described 8 weeks ago, and we are starting to get more, trying to prioritize more, trying to deal with the evidence more, and manipulating that into kind of a practical guideline for the population. So, you know, all to say, this is a changing science. It's also in the midst of a public health emergency. And you know, with resource scarcity, the point is using our vaccine supply in order to save as many lives as possible, you know, reduce the hospitalizations as much as possible, while allowing us to eventually have a horizon to have, you know, a population that's fully vaccinated. So when it comes down to delayed dosing, for the AstraZeneca vaccine, it's actually pretty reasonable to delay dosing. And so in the original AstraZeneca trial, they had chosen many different doses, actually. They gave it 4 weeks apart, they gave it up to 12 weeks apart, and really just tried to see what happened. When they really reanalyzed that trial, they saw the people that had the most protection from the vaccine, 70 to 80% protection against symptomatic COVID-19, it was the group that actually got a delayed dose. And these viral vector vaccines are very different, like AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson, because they are essentially a vaccine piled into a virus shell. And so if the body unfortunately attacks the viral shell before actually getting the actual vaccine into the body, the usefulness of the vaccine goes down. And that's why that delayed dose may actually be better for these vaccines, because you would then, you know, have time for your immune system to calm down by the time you get the second dose, and you don't destroy the second dose along the way. For the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, you know, the manufacturer has been very clear that this is day 21 to 28 for readministration. In the clinical trials, they were allowed up to 6 weeks for readministration of the second dose. But the story is a little bit more than that. We know vaccines have a longer interval than is often recommended. I think in prior vaccines like hepatitis B, like the hepatitis A vaccine, there's buffers that go months to even years sometimes to get a second dose in for that immunologic response. And we know the immune system isn't a light switch, right? It is a maturing part of us, and so you don't necessarily lose an immune response overnight. As information came out with how profound that first dose was in terms of reducing hospitalization, reducing death, even reducing symptomatic COVID-19 and transmitting COVID-19 amongst individuals, particularly from the United Kingdom, we got a better sense that even a single dose, if distributed amongst a large population, if we had issues with resource scarcity, would probably do much more benefit than prioritizing second doses for individuals. And I think, data from England showing that as long as people were getting it kind of at the month 3 point, month 4 point, that again, their immune responses at the end of it in terms of their protection were about the same as people who got the full dose series on time. Recognizing now, we are vaccinating because we want to prevent people from coming to hospital, right? I'm in Ontario, our ICUs are filled. They're at the highest point they've ever been, essentially, that I know of in recent history. The goal now is to keep people out of hospital, and a single dose of vaccine is quite profound in doing that. In UK and Scotland studies 70 to 80% reduction in hospitalization amongst vulnerable over 70-year-olds who are getting the vaccine. So this is where the strategy comes from. It is a well thought out strategy based on recent evidence. And it really does reflect our context of trying to keep our healthcare system under control, trying to reduce transmission in high burden communities, and then pivoting to a second vaccine for those who are susceptible, as well as the general population as the time and supply comes.
Okay, well, thank you. That's helpful because it helps explain why we might be seeing different things in one province versus another, and it really is trying to take in the context of that situation that they're dealing with at the time. So now this question has come up now too, and we were going to address it a little bit later, but I think it's right to do it now since we're on this topic of first and second dose. The question around vaccine mixing, right? If it's like, it was AstraZeneca, but do I get a different vaccine down the road? What's the current thinking on that? Dr. Chagla, I want to leave that one to you.
Yeah, sure. So, obviously the manufacturers are not going to study mixing doses, right? Because that's not necessarily the purview. They want you to do things as per the clinical trials, and so things are taken on time. We know with the AstraZeneca, it has to be recognized that there is a risk of this clotting reaction, and it's quoted somewhere between, in Ontario, 1 in 38,000 to 1 in 125,000. And so when we're thinking about second doses for individuals, obviously there is a concern of re-exposure to this risk, especially as the supply of mRNA vaccines does grow. And certainly there is a lot of considerations for mixing vaccines, particularly people who got again, an adenovirus-based vaccine like AstraZeneca first, and then giving them a dose of Pfizer or Moderna as their second dose. From a biologic standpoint, it likely makes sense. All of these vaccines have a similar target. They generate an immune response to the same target. It's just the mechanism of developing that target is slightly different. But given that this is such a historic vaccine campaign, given that we want to be completely correct about this, we really do need to base these decisions on data moving forward, especially as we're talking about our exit plan, as we're talking about these vaccines as they relate to things like travel and vaccine passports. We want to make very sure that we're not going to necessarily have an adverse effect of immune systems or an adverse effect that's not noted between mixing these vaccines. And so there's a large trial being done in the United Kingdom, the COMCOV trial, which is now enrolled approximately, I think, about 1,000 individuals. There should be some data coming about immune responses very soon. And I think if this is a successful trial, you will see a global interest in terms of this. And then certainly some other countries in the EU have already pivoted their strategy to individuals to get their second doses as this. But again, the nice thing about AstraZeneca, as we all know, is that it does have a long buffer in terms of trying to get that second dose in. And so we have a little bit of a time to, especially as we've given a lot of AstraZeneca in the last 4
Right.
weeks, that we have a little bit of time to wait for these results to come out before we make the decision going forward.
Okay. Okay, great.
Jennifer, can I comment on that as well? Pragmatically, we're seeing some patients that have had issues or reactions with the first vaccine. And so from a practical point of view, public health will only have or provide specific products when it's available. So I think we will have to give a different product for the second dose for some patients.
Okay. All right. Well, we could continue on this subject in of itself. This could be a webinar in of itself, but I want to move on to some of the other questions that have been answered. And I'm going to, a lot of this is going to sit in your camp, Dr. Kim, because we're now looking to the expert on allergy and clinical immunology for some very specific questions related to food allergy. So, you know that the community that's impacted by food allergy has a history of vaccines not necessarily being eligible for. So when you consider past guidance, for example, on egg allergy and flu vaccine, and although that's changed, there's still, some knowledge around that could be a problem. So, let's just really hit the questions dead on. If you have a food allergy, is the COVID-19 vaccine safe for you? And does it differ by type of food allergy?
So the answer is you can receive the vaccine if you have a food allergy, and it really does not depend on what type of food allergy that you have. It really only depends on if you've had a reaction to a specific component to the vaccine or the vaccine itself with the first dose.
Okay, and we'll get to that in a minute. Is it different if you've had a severe reaction or anaphylaxis? Again, food allergy. Does it matter? Like if you have
with food allergy specifically, it does not matter. Even if you've had a severe life-threatening reaction to the food, we do recommend that patients wait for 15 to 30 minutes after the injection if there's any concern at all. And I think most clinics are doing that.
Great. Okay. Now, what about if you've avoided the flu vaccine in the past due to an egg allergy? Do you have to avoid the COVID-19 vaccine?
So first of all, with the flu vaccine and egg allergy, you can receive the flu vaccine if you have egg allergy, even for young children. And that goes same for measles, mumps, rubella. That was another vaccine that was withheld, often not given to kids with egg allergy. So the answer is you can go ahead and receive the COVID vaccines if you have an egg allergy, even if you've avoided the flu vaccine.
Okay. We've had several questions that have come in around, I don't have just food allergy. I also have asthma, I have eczema, or I have a different type of allergy. It's venom, environmental allergies. Do any of these allergic conditions make you ineligible for the approved vaccines?
Not at all. So same thing, even if they've been life-threatening reactions with insect stings or drugs or whatever, as long as it's not the specific component, then they can go ahead and receive the vaccine.
Okay. A couple of more specific questions for some of the folks in the audience. Some might be undergoing oral immunotherapy, okay, or allergy shots. Is it safe to get the vaccine if you're going through those treatments?
Yeah, I just actually had a patient this morning with that issue with peanut immunotherapy, and we generally would recommend that they don't take the immunotherapy dose, the peanut dose or milk dose, too close to the time of the vaccine, just to make sure there's no confusion in terms of what may be causing the symptoms. If you want to be a bit safer, you could hold the dose of the immunotherapy that day when they get the vaccine.
Okay. Now, some also in our audience might be on biologics, whether it's Xolair or Dupixent. What's the perspective on the biologics and the vaccine?
The mechanism of the biologics and the vaccines, at least the allergy vaccine biologics like Xolair, are different than what the vaccine would provide. So the answer is you can absolutely get both together. We generally would recommend putting a 2 or 3 day separation between the vaccine and the biologic, just to make sure that there's no confusion if there's a reaction or a problem. And that seems to be working well for our patients.
Okay, and the last two, and then we're going to move on to some conversation on ingredients. Sulfite allergy, latex allergy.
So sulfite should not be a problem, and latex should not be a problem. As far as I'm aware, the COVID vaccines do not have latex there, so it should not be a problem at all.
Okay, terrific. Okay, thank you. So let's now go on to this conversation about ingredients, because you've said it, Health Canada has said it, that if you have a severe allergy to an ingredient in the COVID-19 vaccine, then you shouldn't take it. And so that's prompted questions, obviously, in wanting to understand the ingredients, which frankly are a bit hard to interpret. So, I want to turn first to Dr. Bettel as the regulator here and someone who's been reviewing these ingredients from a regulatory standpoint. Is there anything in these ingredients that should be a concern for someone with a food allergy?
No, so I think as we've already covered, a lot of the major food allergens are just not present in the vaccines. So they do not have eggs, they do not have nuts. I've got letters about, do they have seafood products, animal products? So none of those ingredients are in the vaccines. So
Okay,
the things you would commonly expect to be food allergens are not part of these products.
Okay, Dr. Chagla, I mean, we took a look at this the last time, and maybe, as someone who's been looking at the adverse reaction data, can you help us understand what ingredients are generating the problems in the vaccines?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you see the 3 different vaccines here. We haven't put the Johnson & Johnson vaccine on, but it is fairly similar to the AstraZeneca in terms of the ingredients. You see kind of in the mRNA vaccines, so Pfizer and Moderna, these large molecules with really long names. These are fat molecules essentially, so they're very similar to body fats that are actually used to essentially package the mRNA, which is the workhorse. mRNA itself is something that's in every cell. You produce millions and millions of molecules of it every moment, and so it is not immunogenic. But you do see the ingredients that are highlighted in red here, the polyethylene glycol and tromethamine, which are stabilizers that are found to complex with drugs and are used. Polyethylene glycol is used as part of other medical products. We use it as a laxative, we use it as a filler in even generic drugs. It's used in cosmetics and shampoos. And so, there are documented allergies to this. They're exceptionally rare, and one would likely be diagnosed with this fairly early in life as compared to kind of at this point in time. Tromethamine, which is a part of the Moderna vaccine, is part of actually a number of different medications. So, for example, an anti-inflammatory called ketorolac, an antibiotic called fosfomycin, are often complex to this drug. And so, again, is something that's relatively innocuous, and people can have reactions. It is exceptionally rare in that context. And then AstraZeneca and Johnson & Johnson contain polysorbate 80, which is very similar to polyethylene glycol. It's a stabilizer used in a lot of cosmetic and other commercial products. It can be immunogenic and lead to reactions, but again, very, very low risk in the grand context. This is well evidenced by the fact that, at least from Canadian and American VAERS data, the risk of anaphylactic allergies to this, particularly in people with undocumented allergies, or no prior documented allergies that would be consistent, is exceptionally low, right? We're talking in the handfuls per million of individuals, and even then, they're all having fairly reasonable outcomes in terms of treatment within clinic and or a few that required a short hospitalization to deal with this. So again, these allergies are there. There are compounds that do have allergic effects, but the recognition of these allergies are exceptionally rare in reality, and at least for PEG and polysorbate, would likely be diagnosed well before getting a vaccine because they're so innocuous.
Okay, so then thank you. Dr. Kim, I'd like to turn to you on this one to kind of go, can you test for these? Like, how would you know if you have an allergy to one of these components? And can you test for them? And if you are allergic, what's the recommendation?
So as Dr. Chaglas mentioned, the true anaphylactic likelihood with these products is extremely small. The testing is not standardized. So when we have patients that have had reactions with polyethylene glycol, polysorbate, what we do is we have them bring in a product that has those chemicals in them, and then we dilute them down and we skin test for them. Generally, though, we go by what's happened with the patient, with the product, as opposed to the test results. Because if you are really allergic to them, the reactions can be quite severe, anaphylactic reactions. So we generally try to avoid. One area where there has been some new evidence and new patients coming up are ones that have had reactions to influenza vaccines previously that may have molecules in them that are either polysorbate, or there's one chemical called Triton X that is a variant of polyethylene glycol. So again, those patients have to be treated cautiously if they've actually had reactions to them. But again, generally what we're recommending is that the benefit outweighs the risk with the vaccines. Even if a patient's had an anaphylactic reaction potentially with PEG, what we're doing is we're actually doing very cautious challenge dosing with those patients. We haven't started yet, again, because of availability of the vaccines, but we're starting soon. And even with patients like that, we're going to cautiously challenge, because the polyethylene glycol issue is really a big gray zone with the vaccines. We really don't know, how the polyethylene glycol causes reactions, what the mechanisms are. Will they occur with the vaccine if you get a reaction to a bowel product? There's a lot of questions, and the bottom line is that patients should get vaccinated.
Right.
So even in those patients, we're challenging.
Okay, so let's just explore that a little bit. So if I have a PEG allergy, or I believe I have a PEG allergy, what should I do next? Who should I speak to? And then when you talk about we challenge them, explore what you mean by that.
So patients with a really suspected PEG allergy or polysorbate allergy should be referred to an allergist. And then what we do is we may skin test for it. But essentially what we would do is get a dose of the vaccine, and then we would provide a challenge. And by challenge, I mean we would start with a tiny bit of the vaccine, perhaps 1/10 of the vaccine or less. And then every 30 minutes or so, we would up dose until they get the whole vaccine over a 2 or 3 hour stretch. And so each patient's going to be different in terms of how fast or how aggressively we do the challenge. But many patients, I think, will be fine with challenging, even if they've had a history of PEG reactions.
Right. Okay, and if you have a PEG, if you're allergic to PEG, can you get the AstraZeneca? Because it looks like that ingredient is different. Right. Okay.
So as Dr. Chagla has mentioned, the molecules are similar, the polysorbate and polyethylene glycol, and there have been some cases of cross-reactivity. But in my experience with the patients that have received the Astra vaccine, even though they've had PEG reactions, they've been okay so far. So it has to be done cautiously, but the cross-reactivity rate is not 100%.
Okay, let's move on to topic 3, which was really around kind of really putting into the conversation or framing in the conversation around adverse reactions, because we've talked a bit about what's been approved. We know that those that have a history of food allergy, venom, aero allergies, they can get that vaccine. But one of the things that could be holding people back is really about understanding and putting into context the adverse reactions. So first, side effects, adverse reactions. Dr. Chagla, let's parse that apart. What's side effects? What's really adverse reactions?
Yeah, so minor side effects are being seen with all the vaccinations, and those are really just the typical things you would expect after a vaccine: a sore arm, muscle aches, fatigue, fevers and chills in a small degree, some nausea and feeling lethargic. They tend to settle down within 24 to 48 hours. It's interesting, the clinical trial suggested AstraZeneca was a bit lower for those, but it seems like in reality it might be a bit higher in more populations. But again, resolving reactions and again, they're expected. There are immunologic responses to these vaccines. Your immune system ramping up, which unfortunately means that you feel a bit off for a day or two. When we start talking about serious adverse events, we start talking about particularly anaphylaxis, which I think we've mentioned quite a bit here. And the one reaction that has been noted with the adenovirus-based vaccines in AstraZeneca is an immune-mediated clotting syndrome called VITT, or vaccine-associated thrombotic thrombocytopenia, which in layman's term is clots with low platelets. And this has been well described in Europe and has had a few cases here in Canada of people where essentially an antibody is made that basically sticks platelets together. People then have clots in fairly serious places, like in the circulation in their head, their abdomen, in their chest, in their legs, and as well low platelets, which are used to actually help clots or stop bleeding. And again, there is a significant number of people that have died of this in Europe and in Canada, a few individuals that have passed away as well. It is a rare reaction. We're learning more by the day. It is, the initial kind of descriptions in Europe were about 1 in 100,000, but much of that was retrospective. So it's a lot harder to find when you're looking back for it. It's a lot easier to find when you're constantly looking for it. And so as we develop protocols, as people are being assessed, as emergency room doctors and family physicians are aware of this reaction, we are probably seeing the incidence being a little bit lower than what was described, closer again to kind of somewhere between 1 in 38,000 to 1 in 125,000. But putting that in perspective, is where the government came from in giving this vaccine out to under 30 or over 30-year-olds for NACI, and different regions have gone between 30 and 45 years old, but really balancing. Yes, there is this risk of a reaction amongst individuals, but there's also a risk of acquiring COVID-19, being hospitalized, being an ICU patient, and really that calculus at the age of 30 does indicate a benefit overall. Now that's predicated on the fact that an mRNA vaccine is not very close, and again, community transmission rates are high. We've seen in places like the United Kingdom, which have actually come out and said, we're not going to give this under 40 years old, because they've done, an immense job with their vaccine campaign to get things under control, where that calculus and that risk balance starts shifting more towards risk, even in that 30 to 40 population. So, right now, again, all these vaccines are relatively safe. Yes, there is this issue that we have to disclose with AstraZeneca, and people should understand the risks as well as what to look for in the first 4 to 20 days after taking the AstraZeneca vaccine. But again, all of these vaccines have significant efficacy in keeping people out of hospital, keeping people from dying, and actually good efficacy against symptomatic COVID-19 and being transmitters of COVID-19.
Okay. Now, I want to ask Dr. Kim about, because one of the adverse reactions we've talked a lot about is anaphylaxis, and this is a community that understands anaphylaxis. How far after the vaccine, Dr. Kim, can you have an anaphylactic reaction?
The majority of reactions happen within 30 to 60 minutes. In the American data, there have been a few patients that reacted after an hour, but like most anaphylactic reactions, the symptoms occur pretty immediately. So that half-hour monitoring after the injection, if there's a concern at all, is reasonable, and the majority of patients will be picked up. The good thing is the population on today, most people have epinephrine auto-injectors with them already, and they're aware of the symptoms of anaphylaxis. So, if symptoms did occur, then the epinephrine injectors can be given. As far as I'm aware of the thousands of people in our practice with food allergy, I have not had any patients have a systemic reaction to the vaccine.
Okay. Now, Dr. Chagla, on the blood clotting, you said it's 4 to 20 days. Okay. So what are the signs and symptoms that people should be thinking about on that?
Yeah, so within 4 to 20 days, and really the symptoms are defined for if there is a clot, where the clot is, as well as signs of low platelets. So low platelets are again the cells that help stick together for us to stop bleeding. And so if you're having easy bleeding, bruising, a rash, kind of pinpoint spots on your legs or hands or on your body, then that is one thing that suggests low platelets. And then the symptoms of the clots. So the vast majority and the serious reaction is clotting within the circulation in the head. And so, that would present as a severe unrelenting headache, slurring or difficulty with speaking, or any visual changes in that 4 to 20 days. That's consideration for, again, going immediately to the emergency room. Clotting in the legs, which would be legs swelling, clotting in the chest being shortness of breath and chest pain. or clotting in the abdomen, severe abdominal pain afterwards. And again, this is typically day 4 to 20. People can have a little bit of symptoms, obviously, in the first 24, 48 hours post-vaccine. That's very reasonable. But really, when your symptoms are persistent, or if you have these new symptoms showing up between day 4 and 20, it's important to get assessed. Many emergency rooms and family physicians are very aware of this reaction. So letting them know you've taken AstraZeneca, you have a concern about some of these symptoms that were described to you post-AstraZeneca vaccine triggers to them the ability to actually start scanning for this. It's routine blood work to actually start diagnosing this, as well as perhaps imaging. And again, there are hematologists on call across the country to actually help deal with managing these cases overnight and getting the appropriate testing and therapeutics out there.
Okay. Now, Dr. Bettel, over to you on adverse reactions and Health Canada's role in terms of tracking this. We obviously realize that the data that's been shared is that it's a very, very small percentage of issues, but how does Health Canada kind of provide some oversight, and what do they do with that information?
Yeah, so in general, so any drugs on the Canadian market have a really strong surveillance system. For vaccines, it's slightly different because you have both a Health Canada surveillance and surveillance through the public health systems as well. So manufacturers are required to report any serious adverse reactions to us. They're required to give us, for all of the COVID vaccines, we put a lot of additional requirements on for regular reporting of all safety issues seen globally. So kind of we regulate the manufacturers and we get the data that way. For adverse reactions following immunization, which are reported in Canada, people are encouraged to report those through their healthcare professional, who is required to report them through provincial public health systems. And that comes to the Public Health Agency of Canada. So it sounds disconnected, but we actually all work together to bring that information together and look at what's happening in Canada, what's changing, very good communication across all of the jurisdictions involved if they see anything unusual. And then as cases are reported, and of course, reports don't necessarily mean a causal relationship, they just mean maybe we should look at it. Then we bring all of that data together to assess whether something may actually be related to the vaccine. So if people are interested, there is a dashboard on the Health Canada webpage that's updated weekly that has numbers of adverse reactions in the context of how many doses have been given, and that information is there. But we're also working internationally as well. So many countries are rolling out the same vaccines. We're all talking weekly and having a lot of interaction about what are we seeing, what's changing, so that if any country notices something that may be a safety issue, everyone else is also looking at their data for the same issue. So there's a very heightened level of surveillance right now.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Okay, now I'm going to move to getting ready to prepare for your vaccination topic. And we had some questions on this. So Dr. Kim, should you inform the clinic that you have a food allergy when you're getting vaccinated?
I don't think that's required now. No, okay. I think if it's a food allergy, then I think it doesn't have to be mentioned.
Okay. Now, and can you or should you get a vaccination in a hospital if you're worried about reactions? What's the perspective coming out of the community from that standpoint?
I think the risk is low enough that they should be received where they're kind of assigned, I guess, in terms of which clinic they're booked at. Okay. So I don't think they have to be at hospitals. The vast majority of sites are not hospital-based now.
Okay, and then we had some questions about, preemptively using Benadryl or pain medication in advance of the vaccination. What's the current thinking on that?
From an antihistamine point of view, the antihistamines should not negatively impact the vaccine effect. So I don't think they're dangerous to take. So if you're on them for other reasons, you should stay on them, the antihistamines. It's possible that it could help some mild symptoms of allergy, but the majority of patients do not need antihistamines beforehand. And Benadryl would be one that we don't recommend because of the sedating impairing effect. You shouldn't be driving when you're taking Benadryl. We would recommend taking a non-sedating antihistamine if you're taking one.
Okay, and then let's move to kind of a second dose question. If I reacted to the first dose, what should I do next?
If the reaction was concerning enough and not like one that's expected, as Dr. Chagla's mentioned, and you think it's an allergic reaction, then I think you should be referred to one of us, allergists, and we've been pretty responsive in terms of getting people in right away. And essentially what we would do is say, you know what, I wouldn't worry about that reaction. Go ahead, get the second dose if it's nothing to be concerned about. If it is something to be concerned about, then again, we would assess in terms of whether we could possibly give a challenge to that patient. If it was really severe, then we would say the second dose probably should be avoided.
Okay. Now, there was a question that came in around if you did have one of those adverse reactions to and had to use your epinephrine auto-injector after your vaccination, is the vaccination still effective?
Yes, epinephrine should not affect the immune response to the vaccine. The most commonly used drug that may impact the immune response would be medium-high doses of steroids. So if you're having an asthma attack and you need prednisone, especially at higher doses, it's possible that that could have an effect on the vaccine effectiveness. But antihistamines, epinephrine, nasal sprays, asthma inhalers should not have an impact on the vaccine.
Okay. And one last PEG question before we move on to sort of exploring the whole concept of risk and benefit. Yeah, are there some childhood vaccines that have that might have PEG in it that would give people an indication of whether their child might be at risk?
There are a few vaccines, the flu vaccines, that have a molecule called Triton X in them. And we've actually just had a paper accepted about this issue, where Triton X is actually a variant of polyethylene glycol. It's possible that if you've had a reaction to the flu vaccine that has that, then the COVID vaccine should be given cautiously, possibly with challenges. But otherwise, as far as I'm aware, polyethylene glycol is not very often in the commonly used vaccines. Polysorbate can be in some flu vaccines as well. If you have any questions, if you just Google vaccine excipients, I think it's through the CDC website, there's a nice table of all the commonly used vaccines with all of the excipients or chemicals in them, and it's quite good.
Dr. Chagla, did you have anything else in terms of that regular vaccines having that component in it? Or we'll move on to...
No, I think Dr. Kim got most of it there, yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I want to move on to you hear from experts, you have to weigh the risk and benefits, right? This whole conversation around the decision to get the vaccine is, think about the risk and the benefits. So, I'm going to start with you, Dr. Bettel, and then I'm going to go to you, Dr. Chagla, and maybe some of the slides that you provided us with might be helpful on this subject. And then, Dr. Kim, I'm going to give you some final comments related specifically to food allergy. So you can rest assured I won't take that question to you. Okay, so Dr. Bettel, how do you give people perspective on this question of risk benefit? How do you make it more tangible?
Kind of wish I'd gone second. It's a hard question.
It is a hard question.
I mean, benefit risk is, and thinking about vaccination, I think is a very personal thing. So from a regulatory decision, you kind of look overall, does a product, is it effective? Is it useful? If there are risks, can you manage them either by affecting how the product is used, by providing with people with information so that they can make choices. So I think it's important to remember that all drugs, all vaccines can have some risks. And then so it's a matter of how do you manage that? So as we're looking at the vaccines right now, what information can we provide about risks of anaphylaxis, risk of blood clots, and how can we help people inform themselves so that they feel better able to consider these things? I think from a personal risk perspective, the conversation has really been about what's your risk of exposure to COVID, what's your risk of bad outcomes if you do get COVID, and then what's the risk of waiting for a vaccine balanced against what the risks of a vaccine might be. So again, that's very personal. I think what I would say is I took the AstraZeneca vaccine as soon as I was eligible and I could get an appointment. So I'm on day 19, still counting. But for me, I looked at, I'm in a pretty safe location. Case counts in Ottawa are not that high, but my risk of exposure to COVID is not zero. And for me, it was a choice of, if I'm vaccinated, I know that all of the vaccines have really good efficacy. I know that they all work to keep you out of hospital, to keep you from dying. And for me, it was a choice of protecting myself and protecting my family and protecting my community, because I believe really strongly, looking at the data from Israel and from the UK and other places, that the faster we get as many people vaccinated as possible, the faster we can get out of here, and I can get out of my basement. So, I mean, that's kind of my personal benefit risk assessment, but I think those are the considerations for people is, what's your risk tolerance for a risk that is real and is serious, but is very rare, compared to all of the other things that could be dealt with by vaccination.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Bettel. Now, Dr. Chagla, would you like us to pull up the slides that you shared?
Sure.
So if we can pull up those slides, guys, that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, I think, one of the things, and we'll hear a lot about AstraZeneca, I think in the next 2 to 4 weeks, is as many people now will have access to Moderna or Pfizer vaccine. Certainly where I live in Peel region, anyone can book a Moderna and Pfizer vaccine appointment. There is going to be a point where that risk benefit scale, when people have access, in the next day or two to Moderna and Pfizer, may start, pushing us to take AstraZeneca vaccine out of distribution. And we're hearing about that slowly. But I think, you want to go to people and not necessarily make them feel like they made the wrong decision either. The people that took AstraZeneca vaccine made entirely the correct decision. 4 weeks ago, our community transmission rates were out of control. Healthcare was going to a crisis. We didn't know where things were going to end up. And the only therapy, and being someone who treats COVID-19, the drugs we have in hospital may change the needle 12% at max in terms of someone dying or not dying. A vaccine before you get sick with COVID-19, is a 80 to 90 to up to 99% protection against dying from COVID-19 at the end. And so you can see the magnitude of it. This is data that actually came out from Public Health Ontario. So since the beginning of the vaccine campaign, looking at people who are partially vaccinated, fully vaccinated, and non-vaccinated in terms of their representation of cases. Now, this is data from January to or December 14th to today, or mid-April, sorry. And so, there are some caveats that, the large-scale vaccine campaign didn't really kind of go into motor effect until March and then started pushing in April. But you can see here what the profound effects are of someone that's partially vaccinated. Remember, we were vaccinating in some of the most vulnerable settings in January and February, in long-term care facilities and patients with significant comorbidities. And, again, that little tiny snippet of blue at the bottom is people that are partially vaccinated being represented in cases. And the breakthrough rate that Public Health Ontario suggested was 0.06% of cases were in people that were partially vaccinated as compared to those who were not. And fully vaccinated are essentially not even existent in these cases. And we see this in long-term care right now.
Right.
The fact that we're in the third wave and long-term care is actually very protected is actually really good signs that these vaccines are working even in the highest burden settings.
Okay.
If you flip to the next slide, you see hospitalizations. And again, very, very minimally represented by individuals that have had a single dose of vaccine 14 days ago. A little bit in that 80+ group, but again, it's still relative to everyone else, much, much less. And then deaths really, it's barely, next slide, sorry. Deaths are barely, again, seen. And you really see no deaths reported in the province in people that are fully vaccinated, and very, very few deaths, under 150 deaths, I think, throughout all age groups in people that have had a dose of vaccine and gotten there. So, I think, again, to people, that first dose you get is still incredibly important, even though we're doing a long second dose. that first dose is the one that keeps people out of hospital and keeps people from dying. And that perspective needs to be there in terms of which vaccine you decide to take, knowing that our community rates are the highest they've been during the pandemic. And I'll just frame the AstraZeneca vaccine in the next slide. We talk about side effect profiles, and I think, again, we're talking about 11 in a million now, probably a little bit higher, closer to 15 now. But you can see, again, the risk of dying with coronavirus is still quite high. The risk of dying of an accident is still quite high. The risk of being hit by lightning is still quite high. And so we really have to weigh those into the factor here. And the next slide really just shows, going head to head in a moderate transmission scenario. So this is a Public Health England's analysis of the AstraZeneca vaccine in a moderate exposure risk scenario, which is kind of where we are now, where taking the AstraZeneca vaccine as compared to not taking the AstraZeneca vaccine in terms of harms, yes, you see a risk of about 1 in 100,000 on the one end, but you can even see up to a 30-year-old a 10 times higher risk of ending up in an ICU from COVID-19 as compared to the AstraZeneca vaccine, and then the clotting risk. And I think this is where it has to come into play, where people don't have a runway to get the other vaccines. It's important that they get the first vaccine possible.
Great. Okay, thank you. That puts some of the risk-benefit conversation into context. So I know we're almost out of time here. So I do want to turn to Dr. Kim. You're talking to patients with food allergy every day. Let's wrap this up with, what's your message to them on this topic?
So my message is, I do understand why patients with food allergy are concerned about reactions to the COVID vaccines or any vaccines potentially, but the data really suggests that there is not a significantly increased risk at all. And we recommend that patients with food allergy go in and get vaccinated without concern about increased risk of anaphylaxis. So I think you should go ahead, and we tell at least 10 or 15 patients per day to do so. And so far, so good. And you can see from Dr. Chagla's slides that the impact of being vaccinated is incredibly higher than the risk of anaphylaxis.
Terrific. Well, listen, I want to thank our experts for joining us today, Dr. Chagla, Dr. Bettel, and Dr. Kim. I know you're very busy people, and we appreciate you spending time and providing your expertise to our audience. In terms of what's next, we will have a short survey that comes up through GoToWebinar immediately following this. And so please fill that out, because we want to make sure we know what the questions that you still have on this subject. We'd also encourage you to take a look at the COVID-19 and food allergy section that's going to is continually updated. Also, there were some questions that were received that were very specific to other allergy related things that are out of the umbrella of food allergy. And so for those patients and individuals that have some more detailed questions, I'd encourage you to go to CSACI's website. We've included the link there, and there are some specific FAQs on their website that touch areas outside of food allergy. We do have an upcoming webinar on May 19th. The focus of that one is on epinephrine first and the role of Benadryl in anaphylaxis with Dr. Wade Watson. So please think about signing up for that as well. Lastly, and very importantly, we'd like to thank our supporters. As you know, we are a charity and we're reliant on the generosity of the community to offer free programming such as this. So if you enjoyed it, please consider a donation to our organization. And we'd like to recognize and thank you these sponsors for today's session: the Walter and Maria Schroeder Foundation, the Sean Delaney Memorial Golf Classic, EpiPen, and the Peanut Bureau of Canada. Thank you for your participation today. And as a reminder, you'll get a recording and that'll be made available in the coming days, and we will email it to you. That concludes our webinar.